How's it going, everybody? It's Leon. I wanted to run you through my main preset on the FAS AX8 that I actually use to play gigs with my band Ragdoll. Very quick rundown. We're a three-piece with a singing bass player, so a lot of my tones are catered to fit in that space that's created by the drums and bass. And to do that, my main amp that I like in the AX8 is the USA 2C++. From what I understand, this is kind of an idealized C+. That's a little bit easier to dial in, and we're going to go through how I set the amp up and how I set my effects up to do specifically what I need. So let's start with the amp. As you can see, this guy right here, the input drive, I've attached a scene controller to it. So that's kind of our first stop. What the scene controller does is really easy to assign. Go to the right click, and then on your source, I've selected scene 1. And then rather than set the amount of gain here, I'm going to go to the scene controllers menu, and I use 4 main scenes. My main rhythm sound, a sound with a rhythmic delay and less gain, and then a sound with a rotary speaker and delay, and then my solo sound. And you can see I've got varying amounts of gain to go with each of those. So that's pretty cool. Back to the amp. The thing about the boogies is the EQ structure is actually before the main overdrive stage. So you have to use these controls in a less intuitive way. Well, less intuitive for me because I grew up playing Marshalls. I apologize about all that popping as well, and also my breathing. I know it's pretty annoying, so bear with me. As you can see here, what happens with the C++ and the Mark IV and a lot of the other Mesa Mark series is you actually use this EQ here to change the way the gain structure works. I'll give you an example. Play a riff with the bass quite low, and then I'll crank the bass. And it gets super, super muddy, so you want to run the bass quite low. Where did I have it? At 2. You can see even at 4 it's a little bit too much, so I'll leave that one down at 2. And the same applies to the mids. I mean, depending on what you're going for, you might want to crank the mids up a little bit more. You know, if I was doing something where I was playing strictly lead guitar, I'd probably have the mids up a lot higher on here, but I want some chunk, so I've got it down at 3. And then I've got the treble at a sensible amount. And with the presence control, I've tweaked this quite a bit because I'm using this with an FR system. So I basically, at a gig, I'll plug my AX8 straight into the board and get a monitor feed. And I normally play around with the presence a little bit, just depending on the room and depending on the system and depending on what the actual engineer wants from me. Sometimes the presence might come up to 2 or 3, but I normally leave it on about 1 because this patch is designed to be played very, very loud. And I find with the presence any higher, it gets a little bit ice picky. And master volume on 4. Now let's go into the graphic EQ, because here's the powerful part where all the tone shaping happens. So your bass, middle, and treble are before the gain. They change the structure of the gain, and your actual kind of traditional EQ happens here. And as you can see, I've kind of gone for the V-curve thing. If you were in a Metallica tribute band, you might run this as low as it goes. And that's totally not how you play that riff, sorry. Which is pretty good, but I play in a 3-piece and I need those mids, so about -6. Still sounds pretty chunky, but in a live situation it seems to cut through a little bit more, and I'm really avoiding those super high mids. And if you crank this, it sounds good at low volume, but when you crank that up, the Fletcher-Munson effect means the lows and the highs will be super pronounced, and I don't think that sounds very good, so I normally drop that down to about 3. So that's one part of the sound. In the dynamic section, add a little bit of output comp. In fact, between scenes, I will crank that up just a little bit on my lead sound, just to iron out a few things. So as you can see, scene controller number 2, controlling the output comp, I've got it around 15% for my lead sound, just to smooth it out a bit, around 10% for my rhythm sound. And for scene 2 and scene 3, which I haven't shown you yet, which are slightly cleaner, I use that to even out the dynamics. So if you can hear scene 1 and scene 2. It seems to smooth things over and tidy it up a little bit. So that is what I do in the dynamic section. And otherwise, I'll talk about the speaker IR in a little bit, but I have matched the, whoa, we do not want to do that. I've matched the low resonant frequency with my speaker cab, speaker IR, I should say. And for me, the magic parameter here is the motor drive. This is kind of an algorithm that simulates the compression of a speaker being driven hard. And this motor drive time constant can adjust, I guess, the feel. So you probably won't hear this much, but when you're playing your guitar through the AX8, I find this really, really drives home the amp-like feel. So, you know, cranking the motor drive, if you leave it at around 4.5, 3, that's probably... Oh, let's go to scene 1 with that one. Sorry that I'm rambling here as well, but I want to give you guys a good overview of how I set up patches. So it's a really musical compression to my ears, and this motor time constant kind of adjusts the feel. If you leave that at around its stock value, 200 milliseconds, it's a little looser feeling. And again, I'm not sure how audible that is, but I can definitely feel it when I'm playing the guitar. So yeah, they're the main tweaks. The other thing that I've tweaked as well is the dynamic depth. So the harder I play, the more low end you get in there, which is really good for playing the chunky stuff. You know, when you're playing light, really adds this kind of low end thud, which I think is really, really important. And the last thing, the supply sag, I'll turn it down to 1 so it's nice and tight and tidy. And that is how I tweak the amp block. Now, the other part of the gain structure that I like to use, I use this FET boost, and I've got a really, really cool pedal. It's called the Workhorse by Anarchy Audio, and I recorded a lot of the last Ragdoll album with the Workhorse as a preamp boost into loose sounding amps like a rectifier. And I've tried to emulate that here with some like clone style settings. It's basically, the Workhorse is a clone, or just a clone with a K. And as you can see here, I've taken the FET boost, changed the clip type to silicon, bumped up the mids, and cranked the tone. And what this does as well, I've got a control actually an external switch here dialed in. So with my Mission Expression pedal, I'll show you what I do. It's got a toe switch on it. So if I'm using the wah and I want to kick in a wah boost, actually I don't even have that activated at the moment, so that's not going to work. I don't have the extra cable for it plugged in at the moment. That is an error on my behalf, but it basically just cranks the drive up to about 4. So if I want even more gain on top of all this ridiculous gain, I've got that. But this drive block is basically, you know, the classic kind of tightening, fattening pre-gain boost. I'll disable it and we'll have a listen to just the amp. I'll turn my wah pedal off. So this is adding a bit of sizzle, and I find that for better use, that sizzle or that hair in the top end really helps the guitar cut through in a live mix with a really loud drummer and a really boomy bass player. And furthermore, you can see the low cut here is at 120 Hertz. I'm also cutting a little bit of the bass, tightening everything else up. Okay, cool. So that is the core tone. Here we have the IRs I'm using. I'm using the Justin York bipolar cab pack IRs, and these are the ones I like. It's a 57 and a Royal 121 impulse on a Mesa V30 cab. I recorded the Ragdoll album, and we used a 57 and a 121 on a Marshall V30 cab, so I'm really just trying to cop that kind of tone. I've got the proximity on just to give it a little bit of the in the room kind of thing, and I've got the low cut at 80 hertz and the high cut at 10k. You know, I might play around with the high cut from time to time, bring it down to like 8k. Depending on the situation, but 10k is normally fine because if it's too much, a lot of the time the engineers will low pass and high pass everything anyway, so I find that works for me. So that's basically the core tone. I'll run you through the scene. So that's probably what I play 70% of a gig on. It's just, you know, that's my chunky rhythm tone. I like the way it sounds. It translates well, you know, through a lot of situations, and it's pretty similar to the tone I was using before I got a fractal. Now, scene 2, maybe 20% of the gig, I turn the drive off and I clean up the input gain with the scene controller. So the core tone goes from this kind of thing. Let me bring that up again. And I'll just play. So it's a lot cleaner. And this rhythmic delay I have set up as well. The tempo is way too high at the moment. I'll kick that one down to about 115 just to play some stuff. So at the moment it's in stereo, which you should be hearing. I've got this set up here with just an eighth note, a dotted eighth note I should say, and a quarter note. And I've tried to, you know, basically balance out the levels so that when it cuts down into mono, that this does not get cancelled out. So I've got the phase reverse on right, and it's a 2290. I haven't touched too much with that. I've maybe rolled off a bit of, no, I haven't even rolled off the high end. So there you go, that's a rhythmic delay. So that's the vibe there. What I really should do, and I thought I'd done this, but I haven't, is the idea is essentially that this delay is, what, 25%? That's, you know, 75% of the speed of this one. So what I will do is I will compensate with the feedback here and actually turn that up to 30. I'm going to save this. So there we go, making my patch better. And that will mean on each side of the stereo spectrum we'll have a similar number of repeats, which is pretty cool. So there's my main delay. Then scene 3 is the same thing. There's slightly more drive on the amp, but I've also got a rotary speaker kicked on. And this is for a couple of sections of a couple of songs in the band set. I think there's maybe 2-3 sections in the set where I need this scene, so I don't turn it on a lot, but those particular sections are very important tonal sections. There's a bridge for one song, and there's also an intro and an interlude that use them. So they're just character parts that I think they really work with, and I'll use the wah with this one as well. So that's the idea there. And then when I step on the solo boost, we're back to the core tone again, but we have got the drive pedal on and a different delay this time. This is my lead delay. It's a stereo tape delay, set to a quarter note with the ratio at about 95%. Mix, you know, just under about 25%. What is that? 22. So. So I'll show you what I'm doing with the parametric EQ block there. I'm boosting the overall level by 1.5 dB. I'm also rolling off some low end. If we have a look, where are we? Yeah, so at 100 Hertz, I'm just increasing that low cut just a little bit, just to tidy up the low end there. And then I'm also boosting band number 3, 2K by 1 dB. So it's really, really subtle and with an overall boost, but you can hear the difference. I'm really honing in on those guitar-centric frequencies. I apologize if that's clipping as well. But yeah, really, really honing in on those, you know, where the guitar sits in that kind of 2K region. Again, so that it can cut through the bass guitar and the cymbals in a live setting. I've obviously got the wah here. I'll run you through that. The most important thing here is I've turned the minimum frequency to 350 and the maximum frequency to 1400 Hertz, which is not much at all, but with a tone like this with heaps of gain, having a lower maximum frequency actually gives it a really cool, you know, vocal kind of tone. Let's have a listen to that, and I'll play around with some of these settings. So here it is where I like it. And here's kind of the stock, you know, settings around the 2000. Which to me is just a little bit harsh. I normally use the wah either for kind of little riffy bits, you know, moving it like a filter, or I use it for soloing, so I want that to really, really cut, and I find having it at a much lower value really gives it a beautiful vocal quality. And turn the fat control up a little bit because why not? It sounds good, and the overall level. Right, the last thing I've got on here that I need to talk about is the pitch block. Again, this is essentially for 1 or 2 sections in the set. I've got it to go down an octave and up a fifth. There's a couple of sections where I'll play a riff, but I'll move the riff up an octave and get this kind of thing. So I'll play it without the pitch shifter on, and with the pitch shifter. And again, that's just really for a kind of character part kind of thing. There's also a solo in the set that I play with the pitch shifter on and the wah and kind of everything. I'm just going to turn the level down a little bit because that was clipping before. And again, that's just purely for something different. It means I can play really, really sloppy on stage and it still sounds cool. So the pitch together with the wah. And the last thing I've got in here is a looper block, simply because if there's a gap in the set, this is a thing I stole. We opened up for Seether, and Sean Morgan was sort of doing this everywhere in the set where he'd just basically record a riff while they were tuning up. So it's a cool thing to do is, you know, you record something and then you can go and tune your guitar. And there we go. So that is the very, you know, no holds bar breakdown of my main preset that I use for playing with Ragdoll. If you have enjoyed it, let me know. If you've got any specific questions, again, let me know. And thanks for tuning in. I've got lots of other videos up if you guys want to check them out, or if you want to subscribe, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks for tuning in.